All right, Entree Architect community, it's 4 p.m. Eastern, which means it's time for the Entree Architect Context and Clarity live conversation for Thursday, March 24th, 2022. Thanks for joining us today. As you get here, say hi. Let us know that you're here and let us know where you're joining the conversation from. If we've never met before, my name is Jeff. I'm in Indianapolis, and I come here every weekday afternoon for one reason, so that we can find clarity around the things that matter most to you, the architect. It doesn't matter if you're the employee of a firm or you own your own firm. Maybe you've circled a date on the calendar and you said 2022 is my year and you're on the runway to starting your own thing. Or maybe you have owned your own firm for a year or 10 years or 28 years and you're starting to rethink or reimagine what that firm could or maybe even should be. All of the topics that we cover, one topic every day, they all fall under the broad umbrella of the business of architecture, and they're all the need to know topics for the success of small firm architects just like you. So thanks for joining us today. As always, on these momentous Context and Clarity Live occasions, I'm joined by my co-host, Katharine MacPhail. Hi, Katharine.
Hello, Jeff.
Where are you today?
Today I'm in same old place. It might sound a little different. I'm still here. Yeah. They accepted our offer on our house though, so I know where I'm going.
Very nice. Congratulations.
Yep.
It's good to know where you're going. I'm
Yep.
sure that
It does. It
that's a
feels
nice
better
feeling.
to know. Yeah.
Good.
Yep.
Sure.
Yeah. And now they're painting my house, and I had to take down this little reminder I had to myself. It says good luck. And apparently that's too much fun. The realtor said I had to take it down.
You need to find a fun-loving realtor.
And yeah, or just take it with me. I'll have luck. Forget about those other people. Anyway.
You do. Yeah,
So
you're not wishing them good luck. Okay.
Nope. Not anymore.
All right. Well, I'm glad you're here. I'm glad the stress of looking has gone away.
Yeah, it's nice.
And for everybody else out there, let's see. I'm looking at the comments right now. I'm on my screen. I see John Jones in first, which for those of you who are new around here, the first person into Context and Clarity wins an award. And the award that we give away is the John Kinney Memorial Crocheted Bathtub Award. John Jones, congratulations. You're the winner of today's Crocheted Bathtub Award. John's joining us from Westport, Connecticut, right across the street from Starbucks. So thanks for joining us today, John. Chris Novelli, welcome back from Massachusetts. Benito, welcome. Thanks for the wave from Atlanta. Mark R. LePage, welcome from Waxhaw, North Carolina. Glad you're joining us. And Diego is over there. He's on YouTube today and joining us from Nicaragua. Great to have you with us today, Diego. And Christian from Ithaca, New York. Rod says every time he sees Carbary, he thinks Cadbury and wants some chocolate. Well, I'll tell you what. As you know, we stock our green room with green M&Ms. So I don't know if that's chocolate enough for you, but chocolate might be a theme for the day. Daniel Stewart, welcome back. Glad you're joining us. And Kurt from Flint, Michigan is also joining us. Both of them, Daniel and Kurt, both on the YouTube side. Looks like a lot of Facebook and YouTube right now. Thanks and hello to everybody out there, whether you're on YouTube or LinkedIn or Twitch or Twitter or Facebook. Glad all of you are joining us today. If you happen to run into trouble, if you're somewhere on Facebook, as a for instance, and you're commenting, but you don't see your comment showing up on the right-hand side of the screen right now, it's because you are in a private Facebook group, and because of privacy rules, which we respect, you have to give Facebook permission to communicate with Restream, which is the platform that we use here for these simulcasts. So there's a URL in the bottom left-hand corner of your screen right now, chat.restream.io/FB, like Facebook. If you take that URL, type it into your window, your search window up at the top. A couple of clicks later, you give Facebook permission to talk to Restream, and you'll start showing up here. Your comments will start showing up over on the right-hand side of the screen. So that's the trick. If you're commenting right now, you have to renew that every once in a while. I don't know if it's 6 months or whatever it is. So maybe if that's happening, you need to renew it, or maybe you're new around here. And if so, welcome. Glad you're here. Just use that URL. Go through that. Like I said, I think it's only 2 clicks, and you'll start showing up. You'll join the conversation here with us, and we appreciate you being here. I've been looking forward to this conversation for a while. We were talking backstage before we went live, and our guest, who I'll introduce to you here in a moment, asked where I found the book. And I said, well, Matthew Ray Scott, who's a friend that I made during COVID, great guy. Some of you have met Matthew. I've had him backstage in some of my challenges. Um, he recommended the book Content-Based Networking to me. I listened to it, thought, yep, this is a fantastic book. It's a fantastic system. And I've also recommended it to a number of you. Actually helped a couple of you walk through it and implement it. And so I've been looking forward to this conversation and the opportunity to introduce this guest here today for us to talk to. So I'll do that momentarily. Katharine, what have I forgotten? Certainly there's something.
I think you covered it. I think that's it. I should
right.
have a checklist though, so it could be a little
Somebody
more
should.
professionally. Yeah.
If this were an airplane, we'd be in danger all the time, I think, without any
Yeah. I'd pay
checklist.
a little more attention maybe if it were an airplane.
Well, that's a good point.
Yeah.
If we crash here, I don't think it's going to hurt quite as bad.
No.
All right. Well, with that, I think it's time to introduce our guest. I want to have this conversation here. So, our guest today is an entrepreneur, a founder, and a podcast host. His story is filled with serendipity and driven by a desire to intentionally and strategically generate serendipitous intersections. I don't know if that's actually a thing, but it sounded good as I was writing it. His work presents a new approach to building your professional network. He's the founder of Sweetfish Media and the author of Content-Based Networking. James Carbary, welcome to Context and Clarity Live.
I'm so pumped to be here, Jeff, and Katharine. Thanks for having me.
It's great to have you here. Right after at the first time I reached out to you, your assistant said, "Oh, sorry, James is on a sabbatical right now." Like, oh man, that's timing, right?
Yeah.
And so I happened to reach back out, maybe just a few weeks ago, actually, and your assistant said, "Great timing. He's back from his sabbatical." And he'd love to do the show. So thank you very much for coming back, first of all, and for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. This is going to be really fun. Sabbatical is nice and refreshing, but I love talking about this stuff. So I'm pumped to be hanging out with you.
I have a question about your sabbatical.
Yeah.
You just inspired me just to tell everybody I'm on sabbatical.
You're working.
Well, I mean, tomorrow I will tell everybody I'm on sabbatical, and I'll be here tomorrow too. But you know what? Except for this, I'm on sabbatical.
I love it. It's a great excuse.
It sounds more like academic than vacation or taking a diet from podcast appearances.
It's just nice to put your out of office email and just say, "Hey, I'm on sabbatical, and I'm not going to read this email. So if you want me to see it, I'm deleting all my emails until this date. So email me again." And
you deleted them even, so you didn't have to read them when you got back.
Yep.
Wow.
That was one of the things I learned from Michael Hyatt. If you're going on sabbatical, just tell people when you're out of office, "Hey, I'm deleting all these emails. So email me again if it's something really important."
I love that.
I do too. And some of you have heard me tell this. I had a client years ago that, high profile person in charge of a lot of things and had a lot of people that they had to answer to. And he always said that the first email request that he got, he would delete. Because if it was really important, they would email again. I thought,
now you have
I've never tried to implement that.
Yeah, now you have all these automation platforms that automatically send 18 follow-up emails. So it's getting crazy out there, but I definitely get it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, again, great to have you here. We are pumped as well. And as I said at the beginning, your book is Content-Based Networking, which is on one level is all about building relationships. So maybe that's where we start the conversation.
Yeah.
Why are relationships so important?
Yeah. So, for those of you that have read or listened to the book, you know the story that I share early in the book that there was one relationship in my early 20s that changed the entire trajectory of my life. And so, when I was, I think, 22 or 23 years old, I got the opportunity to go to. We won this like sweepstakes through Alltel, an old phone company, and so I didn't even win it. My roommate's brother-in-law won the sweepstakes, and the sweepstakes said that you can take you and 9 of your friends to a professional football game of your choice. And so I was one of the 9 friends that got to tag along for this incredible experience. And so we took a private jet to New York City. We watched the Giants play the Cowboys. We were in a suite right next to Jerry Jones. Barry Sanders, if for football fans out there, Barry Sanders was waiting for us as we got off the private jet in New York City. And he, we got to hang out all over New York City throughout the day. And then that night we watched the game with Barry in that suite. And so just this incredible experience. But the thing that changed my life about that experience was a guy named Jeff. And so Jeff was with us the entire day. I just assumed he worked for Alltel. I didn't really know, why Jeff was there, but he was there making sure that all of the logistics happened right. So, okay, when the plane lands, the limo bus is going to be here waiting on them, and then he arranged the police escort and all that stuff. And then he made sure that we didn't have to like walk far from any place that we ate in New York City. Like it's just really well planned, and Jeff was the reason for that. And so I hit it off with Jeff throughout the day, ended up talking about faith and family and work and all this stuff. And we had an extra ticket to the game that night, and so he joined us for the game, continued the conversation there. Well, we parted ways. I didn't honestly think I would ever see Jeff again, but we swapped contact info, and a few months later, he ended up reaching out and asking if I would consider moving to Orlando, Florida, where I live now, to help run the helicopter division of his logistics company. So it turns out he didn't work for Alltel. He was a small business owner, owned a transportation logistics company. And so he asked me to come out and help him run the helicopter division of his company, focused on servicing the NASCAR client base. So I said yes. I prayed about it for a few days, and ultimately decided I want to move from Oklahoma to Orlando, and took him up on his offer. And so for 3 years, I worked for Jeff, and I got to put Jeff Gordon on helicopters, and got to hang out with John Cena and Whataburgers after the Super Bowl, and like all kinds of crazy experiences. And I met my wife here in Orlando. So shortly after I quit working for Jeff, I started really pursuing entrepreneurial ventures. But I never would have done that if it weren't for Jeff's influence in my life. For 3 years working for an entrepreneur ultimately inspired me to pursue entrepreneurship. So literally that single relationship with Jeff changed everything for me. Fast forward a few years, and I look back on that relationship with Jeff, and it's fantastic. It was awesome. It was very serendipitous. But I thought, if that one relationship could change the entire trajectory of my life, what if we could be more thoughtful and intentional about reverse engineering relationships that we know can push us further in our career, push our businesses further. And so that's ultimately what led to the strategy that we're going to be talking about today: content-based networking, and how we use content collaboration to meet the exact people that we know we need to connect with, and that we want to be friends with, so that we can pursue our goals and dreams.
Yeah, I love that story. And just to be clear for everybody in the audience, the Jeff that he's talking about was not this Jeff. We got
Yeah,
two different Jeffs
they're
in
two
the
different jobs.
conversation. Yeah, yeah. But you mentioned serendipity, and I mentioned serendipity in the intro, which that's one thing that caught my eye or my ear as I was listening to the book, because I think back across my career and go, yeah, there's an awful lot that I owe to quote unquote serendipity.
Mhm.
And I love that idea of trying to figure out, is there a way that, fast track it isn't the right way, but right word, but to be strategic
Yeah,
and maybe accelerate
yeah.
some of these serendipitous experiences. And so you've come up with this framework, and I love
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. So it's so funny to me, Jeff. So many folks, especially as I learn more about, like, we're actually building a podcast studio here in Orlando, or the west side of Orlando, and so, just learning more about your audience and architects, and the architect I'm working with here in Orlando. I'm picturing him in my mind as we're having this conversation. But I think folks like my architect, um, they go to things like Chamber of Commerce. I don't know if he actually does, but Chamber of Commerce, local events, things like that. And that's kind of the I guess the standard, or the traditional way to go about building strategic relationships, is you go somewhere to a setting like that, and you hope that you end up connecting or meeting with somebody that is, that can be that can be benefited by something that you do, by your architecture expertise. And I just think, like, as I've thought through the more traditional ways of building relationships, this approach of, instead of just sitting back and hoping that the right person comes to an event like that, or that you happen to meet, through somebody else, proactively kind of taking the bull by the horns, and proactively making those relationships happen by simply trying to collaborate with them on a piece of content that you create. I'm convinced that that it is a much better approach than what a lot of folks out there are doing.
So let's take that and run with it for a minute. You're working with an architect right now, and you see them doing what probably an awful lot of people in our audience do. I'm going to raise my hand. Been there, done that.
Yeah,
Using the same methodology, right? And it is definitely a relationship based business.
yeah,
I was on a panel discussion earlier today, and I said I don't see a time where it's not a relationship based business. So you're working with this architect. How would you coach them to do things differently? What would you say
yeah,
to him or her about maybe implementing the content-based
yeah.
networking framework?
So for him in particular, the reason that I got referred to him, which I think his main business development strategy is probably what a lot of folks on the call are doing, which is word of mouth, right? Like, you do really great work,
Exactly.
exceptional
Yep.
work,
Yep.
and then the people that you work with tell you about, and so I met this guy through my general contractor, which I'm sure is a very common thing to get introductions through folks like that. And so the reason I got introduced to this guy is because we're doing something pretty creative with the space. It's not a standard building. We're in it right now with the city, because it's very much not a standard building. We're going to have like a go-kart track out back, and a lazy river running through the building, and podcast studios that have different elements, and a movie theater room, and all bunch of crazy stuff.
That
So,
actually sounds pretty standard for Orlando, though.
right.
Sorry to interrupt.
Right. We're trying to compete with the mouse over here.
Yeah.
But uh, so I would say the reason I got recommended to this guy was because he tends to really gravitate to creative projects like that. He's a great outside the box thinker. He just gravitates toward that. And so with him, I mean, at least based on the relationship I've had with him so far, I don't think that he necessarily needs to live in Orlando for me to work with him. A lot of the work he's done has been done virtually. Now, he's helped, he went down to City Hall the other day with me and helped meet with some of the people at the City Planning Commission. And so that stuff, obviously, he can't do if I were to live somewhere else. But I would look at him and say, if you want to do these creative projects, I would start some sort of a show that positions you to interview creative entrepreneurs that have a successful business, and would likely be wanting to do something in real estate, if they're not already doing something in real estate that is creative. And so finding people in whether it's in your city or even nationally, I would probably encourage him to try to find a niche that allows him to reach out to people all over the country, and find folks that are speaking at conferences, talking about like interesting stuff they're doing from a real estate perspective, or just people that have interesting businesses that could lend itself to, like, hey, you need something you need something physically designed to be able to execute on a lot of the vision that you're sharing. So that's the direction I would go with him if he had any interest at all in doing this kind of stuff.
And you mentioned show. Does it have to be a podcast? And
No,
for
not at all.
those that are watching or listening right now, so I mentioned that James is the founder of Sweetfish Media, which is a podcast first media company.
Yeah.
So that naturally comes out of your mouth first,
Yeah.
of course, but
Yep.
there are other ways to do it, aren't there?
Yeah, totally. So it's, for those that haven't read the book or listened to the book, essentially this idea is based in content collaboration. And so I do a lot of content collaboration by asking people to be on one of the podcasts that we produce. But you could easily build these kind of relationships by reaching out to somebody and saying, "Hey, I'm writing an article for my blog and I'm highlighting, 3 creative entrepreneurs that are in this space. I would love to jump on a, 15, 30-minute call with you to talk through some of the, this particular project that you're working on so that I can highlight you in my blog post." You could do it with, a video series that you're doing for YouTube. I just gravitate toward podcasting. One, it's easy to jump on and, you can repurpose the content like y'all are doing really, really well. You can use it for video. You can use it on an audio only podcast app. But yeah, you could do it with a blog post. You could do it with a research report. You could say, "Hey, I'm compiling research for creative entrepreneurs, and I'd love to jump on a call and ask you, a list of 5 or 10 questions. Would you be up for it? I'll make sure to share the research with you, after I've, had my 100 phone calls with creative entrepreneurs or, whatever." So it's really the bigger idea is come up with a piece of content that you can create that forces you to collaborate with the exact people that you want to build relationships with. That way you're building relationship, not on a, "Hey, I'm an architect and you should hire me" kind of level. You're building the relationship on something that is valuable to them. Like they're getting featured in a piece of content that they can then use in their own marketing. And so it positions you as someone that wants to add value to them, even though it's completely disconnected from what you do for a living.
Yeah, I love that approach because it's, there's so many levels to that. We're collaborating, we're building this relationship, we're providing value to you, the person that we're collaborating with in being featured through the process. I mean, there's so many different layers to that. Um, that as we were saying before we went live again, or again before we went live, was um, nobody likes to be sold or
Mhm.
sold to, right? You don't like the cold call. You don't like the cold email. All those things. Or my pet peeve. I'm on LinkedIn a lot as well.
The pitch slap.
Oh, absolutely. 3 times a day.
What's the pitch slap?
The pitch slap is when
Pitch.
someone connects with you on LinkedIn and
Mhm.
6 seconds after you accept the connection,
Oh, yeah.
you get a sales pitch in your DMs. So we call
Yep.
that the pitch slap.
I like that.
Yep. Yeah, all the time. And actually, I got one today that didn't even wait for the pitch slap. It's just slap, or just pitch, I guess. it was
Well,
it was
what
right
do
in the
you
request.
what do you do with those people? Do you delete them after they do that, or do you answer them,
I
or what do you do?
usually let the first pitch slap slide, but there's all this automation software now. So if they just keep like hounding me, it's usually, I know it's just a bot. It's software. It's not even them doing it. And so I'll usually just block them if they send 2 or 3 messages that are completely irrelevant to me and have zero interest in like trying to build an actual friendship. They're just trying to sell me their web development services or whatever. I'll
Mm.
just unconnect with them and block them.
Yeah, yeah. And so, to be clear for everybody out there, we're talking about essentially the opposite of that.
Yep.
Right. I was gonna say that's the opposite of making friends.
Yep.
Yeah,
It's
Yep.
just
yeah.
getting
And
people to talk.
it looks like Chris Novelli had a good question. What are some different ways to find these people that you want to collaborate with? And I would say, Chris, that some of the things that we've done in our company for our customers, and then just some of the things that I've done personally, I'll find people that are speaking at conferences that tends to be a good one. So for in our business, we try to connect with B2B marketing leaders. Usually it's like the VP of marketing, and it's at a SaaS company, a software company, usually between 100 to 1,000 employees. And so so I can go and look at industry conferences that are specifically for B2B marketing leaders. And I can look and see like, okay, who is speaking at that conference that matches my ideal buyer? And I'll literally just reach out and say, hey, I see that you're speaking at, Marketing Profs event. Would you be up for basically taking the talk that you're going to do there and sharing it with our listeners on B2B growth? I think it would be really interesting. That solves a couple problems. One, they don't have to prepare something new. They're already putting in a lot of prep to speak at that conference. So they've got something quality to say whenever I ask them to be on B2B growth. Not everybody obviously is speaking at conferences. That's just one way to do it. The other way to do it is just doing very granular searches on LinkedIn and finding like, okay, if I want VPs of marketing in the computer software industry at companies with 100 to 1,000 employees, you can type all of that into LinkedIn and it will spit out, okay, these are the people that you that you want to know. Really, anybody can do that. The thing that I've found is when I used to do a lot of more blanket messaging. And so I would send I try to be very brief when I reach out to people, but it would be a pretty vague message. It would, hey, so-and-so, would love to have you as a guest on B2B growth. Is that something you'd be interested in? And then that was it. And that did pretty well. I mean, I would say that a lot of people still responded to that. I've noticed over the years, as more people have started using this approach, you need to be a little bit more personalized. So when you go to LinkedIn, you find the exact people that you want to connect with. Maybe it's based on city. Maybe you only work with people in your area, whatever the criteria is. Start reaching out to them and go to their website. Like, try to do a little digging online. Like, there's a lot of stuff you can find out about people in a non-creepy way just by Googling their name, and just find a connection point, and incorporate that into the message. It doesn't mean that your message needs to be 18 paragraphs long. Like, people are not going to respond to that typically. But if you can find a point of connection and a reason why you think they'll have something to add to the content that you're producing, more often than not, people are going to say yes. It's extremely flattering when you ask folks to contribute to what you're trying to create. So hopefully that helps. But yeah, LinkedIn, conference speakers. What are some other things we've done? One of the things early in the life of Sweetfish, we would go through all of the Inc. 5000 companies, and I would have a VA on Upwork that would just like, hey, I would say, hey, find all the VPs of marketing at companies with more than 50 employees or 100 employees from this Inc. 5000 list. And they would, you'd have that built for, I don't know, it's like $7 an hour or something. And then you just go through and, hey, I noticed that you were on the Inc. 5000 list. I'd love to share part of your story on B2B growth. Would you be up for it? And so that's another way to do it. But you can get really creative. Knowing your niche, I think being focused on a niche, the fact that we know that VPs of marketing at B2B SaaS companies are our buyer helps us tremendously. So, if Jeff has a product to sell to architects and he has a community for architects, him asking an architect to be on this show it's going to be a slam dunk. Of course, he's going to be able to do it. But the mistake I see a lot of people make is they don't niche. They have no focus. And so when you reach out and ask somebody, it's really hard. Like, okay, but why me? Like, why would you want me to speak to this? And a lot of people try to make their show about their specific expertise instead of the thing that their potential buyer cares about and can speak to. So the example for us, like I've mentioned it a few times, but our podcast at Sweetfish, our flagship show, is called B2B Growth. And it's a show about the front lines of B2B marketing. So it makes sense that we would talk to VPs of marketing at at these companies that we're trying to work with to be on the show. Now, if the show was about expertise, if the show was about B2B podcasting, and I reach out to a VP of marketing that doesn't have a podcast, which is great because I want to produce their show. So I hope they don't have a podcast. But if I made the show about my expertise, it eliminates me from being able to ask them to be a guest, because they're going to be like, I don't know the first thing about B2B podcasting. Why would I want to be on your show? And so you have to make sure that the theme and the what your show is about is aligned to something that your ideal buyer actually cares about. So the architect, to go back to the example that I shared earlier, the architect that I'm working with, I would say, do a show focused on sharing the stories of creative entrepreneurs. And he would say, oh, I'm not a creative entrepreneur. Well, I wasn't a B2B marketer either. I didn't know the first thing about B2B marketing when I started B2B growth. I learned a whole lot after I interviewed about 1,000 people and heard them talk about what they care about and what their pains are. But I didn't know the first thing about it until I started interviewing them. And so I got to be the journalist. I got to be curious. I got to ask a lot of questions and highlight their expertise. And that's critical for making the strategy work. You have to make the show about something they can speak to.
I think that's really great advice. And we've been kind of dancing around the actual system that you lay out in the book, in content-based networking. What's the very first step that we have to go through in order to really do this?
Yeah. So step one, you got to get clear on your goals. You've got to figure out what you're trying to do. Are you trying to do business development? So where you're going directly to the person that is trying to buy your architectural service? Or do you think it's a smarter play for you to build relationships with GCs in your region, because you know that you get an enormous amount of business through GCs? So getting clear on what your goals are on the front end is ultimately going to inform the next step, which is, once you know your goal, now you can determine who are the people that I need to be reaching out to and building relationships with. So I've determined, I'm an architect in Chicago, and I've said, hey, I just know that when I can get in with a GC, I end up getting jobs for the next 10 years because I do great work. These types of GCs work on really interesting projects that I love being a part of. And so I'm going to focus on finding these types of GCs all over the country. And now, okay, those are your people. Like, now you take it and you're going to start finding, like, okay, who are the GCs that are speaking at conferences? Who are the GCs that I find on LinkedIn or other platforms? I think, I don't even know if GCs are on LinkedIn. My GC is on LinkedIn, but
They are.
Like finding those folks and then reaching out and saying, hey, I saw that you're working on a couple creative projects. You would probably see that on their website in Raleigh. And I'm looking to highlight, some work that creative GCs are doing. Would love to bring you on, my show, The Innovative GC. Would you be up for it? Well, that's extremely flattering for that GC. You want me to be on a show called The Innovative GC? Of course. So you've now done the groundwork of building that relationship. The third step is content. What is, I let the cat out of the bag there. The content for that particular example is the Innovative GC. That's your wrapper. That's your mechanism that you're going to use to build relationships with the exact people that you want to build relationships with.
I like that idea. Is that a real podcast yet?
Nope.
Because somebody should take that and run with
Right.
it.
Take it and run with it.
Yeah.
It might be tomorrow.
I kind of like to address Jake's question. Would that be okay with you?
Yeah.
Go for
it. So he says, let's say we create content, bring in interesting parties, and the ball gets rolling. Isn't it still a sales pitch after that? Just connecting doesn't necessarily bring in business. It's not ideal if you spend all this time creating content and nothing comes of it.
Totally.
What do you do then?
Yeah. So you've got to have a system for nurturing relationships with these folks. So for us, I'll bring them onto B2B growth, and then I will stay connected with them on LinkedIn. Sometimes I'll even connect with them on more personal platforms like Facebook. I've done some things in the past where I'll look at, okay, who are the last 100 people that I've had on B2B growth, and I planned a tour. I think it was 2017 or 2018, where I literally hopped on a plane and I organized groups of people in different cities, and I just organized dinners. And so I was like, okay, who have I had on B2B growth from Boston? and I flew up to Boston for a day, and I did a dinner in I think I did 2 or 3 dinners actually over the course of a couple days. And so I deepened the relationship with the people that I use the podcast to build a relationship with. Another one that we've recently done at Sweetfish is we'll have somebody on the show, and then we've built these micro communities. So they're like 5 to 10 person groups that meet monthly for like 30 minutes. And it's just a peer group that we as Sweetfish organize, but we'll have them on B2B growth. And then we invite them to be in one of these peer groups. So it's like, hey, connect with other VPs of marketing at software companies that are trying to solve the same problems you're trying to solve. We're going to facilitate the call once a month. And that way that keeps you in relationship with them. And what I found is that, like, if you get them ingrained into a community like that, you're truly adding value to them, they're going to want to know what you do. Like, it's not going to be any surprise to them. They would have had multiple email exchanges with you. Like, they know you're an architect. And in those smaller groups, you can, sometimes it'll come up and you'll obviously be sharing your experiences, your perspective. And so they're going to find out that way. Once I found that once you have had 2 or 3 genuine like connection points with somebody, and the first one could even be a pre-interview. So like do a pre-interview first for like 15 or 20 minutes, then schedule the interview. So now by the time you're on the interview, it almost feels like you're more familiar with them by the time you get to the interview because you've already had the pre-interview. And then if you want to invite them into a smaller, a smaller group setting, that's worked really well for us. If you want to organize dinners, so focus, you're like, hey, the first 10 episodes that I do for my show, the Innovative GC, I'm going to focus on GCs in Charlotte. And I know that next quarter, I'm going to fly to Charlotte and I'm going to put a dinner together. And so like, just have a strategy, have a plan, knowing that the podcast is just or the content creation, whether it's a podcast or blog or whatever, that's just the tip of the spear. You're exactly right. The person that asked this question, you're exactly right. Like that's the way in, but the relationship is going to be developed over time.
Yeah, I think it's important to remember, whether we're talking about content-based networking or, whatever system or strategy that you want, we're talking about professional services here. Again, it's based on relationships and trust. There's no hack or shortcut, right? Everything is a long tail, long view effort. So I do absolutely agree that it can accelerate the know, like, and trust in the relationship piece of it. But as you pointed out, Jake, and you're James, you were telling the story a minute ago about inviting someone on, and I'm thinking exactly that. It's if you are trying to sell them your services by having them on, that's not an interview anymore. That's a sales pitch. That's not the point of this at all, right?
That's a great way to ruin your reputation and have them tell all their friends, like, hey, this guy's going to ask you to be on his podcast. Do not say yes.
Mm.
Yeah, because he's going to pitch you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can I ask you about the gifts? You'd mentioned giving gifts and what appropriate gifts are. And there was a book. Was it gift? What's the name of that book that you mentioned?
Giftology.
Giftology. Okay. I thought I was making
actually that guy, John Rulin, he just wrote a kid's book too. So there's a kid's book companion to Giftology that I just bought for my little boy.
Great. Well, I'm going to get that one because what would you say you don't want to give too many gifts, or like you said in your book, not swag, not pens and mugs and all that stuff with your logo on it.
Yeah. So I'll show you a few of them that are actually sitting on my desk right now. So one of the shows that I was on several years ago, if you all can see this, it's just this little, a little frame, but it's a quote that I said on her show, Unleash Possible. It's got my name on it. A big takeaway. Oh, sorry, my camera just went off. A big takeaway from John's book, Giftology, is that you want the gift to be about them, not about you. And so what I like about what I just showed y'all, it's got her brand on it. It's got her show's name on it. I know exactly that I know when I look at that every single day on my desk, I know Samantha Stone sent that to me, even though it doesn't say Samantha Stone, doesn't even say her company name. It just has her show name on there, but it says my name on it. And my name is the most attractive name in the dictionary to me. Like I love my name, and so does
Yeah.
everybody else. And
Mhm.
so making the gift about them, especially if you've done a content collaboration with them where
Mm.
you've got a recorded 30-minute conversation, whether you used it for a blog post or a research report or whatever, take something from that and
Mm.
then craft something around it for them. Here's
Mm.
another one. This one is just a regular frame. And it's a quote of something I said. She put my headshot on it, and then she's got her logo for her show right down there. So both of those are simple examples, and they scale pretty well too. Like if you do one of these episodes a week or even a couple a month, it's pretty easy. I mean, you can build the system and have a VA execute this strategy pretty easily.
Mm.
Um, so
Did they come
that's
in frames? They framed it for you, or did you frame
Yeah,
it
they framed it
yourself?
for me. The one that I
Oh.
just showed, the one in the frame, she actually had a whole like gift, is a whole gift box. And so the framed picture was the one that stayed on my desk. But a gift,
Mm.
something in giftology is really think through what can you get them that they will want to put on their desk. And so we invited some folks to Orlando. This was a few years ago. We invited they were customers, and some of them I think were potential customers. But I've got my giftology hat on, and I'm thinking, what can I do for these folks that they will want to showcase in their home whenever they get back? So my wife like screen printed their pillowcase with their company's logo, like in the corner of the pillowcase. We had a wine, a bottle of wine for them waiting on them in the room of the VRBO that we rented. And the wine label was their podcast cover art because they were
Wow.
all like B2B
That's cool.
podcasters. And so like doing things like that, just outside the box things, like we figured out what their favorite candy was. So you can do things in your pre-interview that set you up to do something that you're going to do a few weeks later,
Mm.
but you're just information gathering. It's like, hey, I got a few random questions that we asked to all of our guests. What's your favorite candy? How many kids do you have? Like
What's your
stuff
home
like that.
address?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, there's even software now where you can get people to like submit that
Mm.
without it like going directly to you. So I forget the name of the tool. I just heard about it the other day. But
Mm.
anyway, yeah, there's
That's pretty
a lot of fun ways to do it, but
pretty
I would
great.
definitely recommend giftology.
Jeff, what do we send out to our guests?
We give them green M&Ms, and
We don't want to ruin the surprise, James.
yeah, we're gonna have to
Yeah.
we're gonna have
Gotta
to
come up
up
with
our
something.
game on that.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you said make the gift about them, which is really another foundational piece, I think, of content-based networking. Is even the content is about them, not about me, not about us, right? In
Yeah.
that the quote is from Dale Carnegie. Dale Carnegie. The sweetest sound to anybody's name is the sound of, or the sweetest sound to anybody's ear is the sound of their
Under
own
their own
name, or
name.
something like that.
Yep.
Mm.
Yeah. I think that's a really great thing to point out. Right. Again,
Yeah.
we're trying to
I mean,
build
I've literally,
relationships.
I've got a picture of my 6-month-old son on my desk. I've got a Coke Zero. I'm a big Coke Zero fan. I've got a Coke Zero bottle that my roommate gave me. One of our roommates gave us. It says Dad on it. I've got a jar of date night ideas. I've got a picture of our team from one of our recent executive retreats. And then I've got these 2 quotes from these podcasts. And so like in the most intimate space, my 6-month-old son, my date nights for my wife, my executive team and my company sit these things that I now think about these people every day when I sit at my desk. And I just think it's such powerful real estate in someone's world if you can give them a gift that they actually want to put on their desk and look at every day.
How about a mug? You could send out a quote from something they said on your show, put it on a mug.
Totally. Yep. The creativity is, you could go
T-shirt,
wild.
you could do, yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. We do actually tomorrow is our Context and Clarity book club episode. So once a month we read a book and we do a book club episode of Context and Clarity. We may have to do giftology as one of the one of the
Yeah,
books.
John would be a fantastic person to do for this call too. He brings value every time. Every time he's we had him on B2B growth a long time ago, and his content is incredible.
That's great. That's good to know. It's a good suggestion. So Christian asked a question a minute ago, and we talked about this earlier a little bit as well. There you go. What's the role of humor while creating content? They're in the architecture world. There, and of course, I think it depends on your client, right? But there can be, it's professional services. It's professionals providing services. So, is it okay to joke around or have a sense of humor?
I think so. I mean, I'm a millennial, and so it's like hardwired into my DNA to like write like I talk, and not try to be stuffy. We just had on our leadership team meeting earlier this week. Somebody mentioned wanting to start a committee, and I was like, if you ever say the word committee again, I'm going to run out of this room. So I personally detest stuffiness, anything that sounds stuffy or overly professional. Even we sell a professional service, right? A podcast production service, but I just think humans are humans, and I think y'all do a fantastic job, even just facilitating this conversation of just being real and people that like, you don't need to be stuffy and speak in business lingo to connect with someone. I think it actually sometimes hurts you whenever you do that. But I think the role of humor in creating content and in relationship building is contextual, right? Like based on you. And so I am not a very funny person in settings like this. I'm not quick on my feet. I'm not like, I just don't have that skill set. But when I write, I can be a little bit more thoughtful. I can think about it. And so I tend to be a little bit more comedic in my writing, but in settings like this, my wife will tell you, I'm not funny. And so but I don't need to be. There are other ways to have charisma and to get people to like you. So the thing that I really, whenever I'm doing podcast interviews and doing content-based networking for our business, I just go all in on curiosity. And so I'm trying to ask as many questions as I possibly can to know them better, to understand them more. And like most of the time by the end of that call, they like me because I'm genuinely interested in them. And so it's a form of charisma. My buddy Timmy, I think I actually talk about him in the audiobook. I don't know if I don't think he's in the physical book, but I talk about him in the audiobook. And he does a fascinating job of this. He is incredibly charismatic, and it's not because he's funny. It's because he is just so warm and friendly and vulnerable. He presses into vulnerability like crazy. So he'll be on a call with a podcaster, and he's like, "Oh my gosh, you wouldn't believe what happened to me this morning. My wife, stubbed her toe, and so I'm having to da, 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 da." And he's just going all in on like the drama of his morning leading up to this podcast interview. But it tears down a wall. It gets people super comfortable talking to him. And he's a children's book author, and they end up wanting him to write a kid's book for them by the end of the process. So there's all kinds of like, there's different ways to inject charisma into this strategy, this approach. Humor is certainly one of them. I just unfortunately don't have that gift.
Well, I think Christian thinks you do because he's the one who really liked the introduction. He thought that was pretty funny.
Yeah.
I can be a little more funny written, but definitely not when I'm doing podcast interviews.
But it reminds me, I want to point this out to everybody that's listening too, that I mentioned before. I was on a roundtable show earlier today, and one of the other guests on the roundtable was Finn McLeod from SOM, Skidmore, Owings and Merrill, large international firm. And one of the things that Finn said was, we have to remember that we're communicating with human beings that may not speak our language. Yep. And, I think that whole idea of being relatable, and I always say meeting people where they are. I think that's really, really important.
Jeff, have you ever heard of Charisma on Command? It's a YouTube channel.
Charisma on Command.
Yeah, it's fantastic. I
I
mean,
have to
they've
write
got a
that
whole
down.
course and like you can buy the course, but they basically break down really famous charismatic people. So they'll do they'll do an episode on like, I say episode, they'll do a video on something that The Rock did, like how The Rock interacted with Jimmy Fallon. And like they'll break down, these are the 7 things that The Rock did that you can also do to be more charismatic. So if folks are interested in this, but they're a little bit insecure, like, I don't know, like having these conversations with people around a piece of content I'm trying to create, like, I would for sure suggest that folks go check out the Charisma on Command YouTube channel, because there is a wealth of wisdom.
Definitely checking that out.
I wanted to share Jefferson's comment because I think he learned something here. It says, "Hey James, I read your mission to see 400,000 kids in foster care have a gospel-centered home available to them, and I'd love to feature you on our podcast, Purpose and Play Studio. Up for it?"
Yes, resounding yes.
Jefferson,
that was perfect. Very good example.
That was.
Yes.
That was. Jefferson, we'll hook you up via email.
James at sweetfishmedia.com.
There you go. James at sweetfishmedia.com.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
A minute ago, you said lean into vulnerability, and I just had a flashback because the book that we'll discuss tomorrow for book club is Dare to Lead by Brene Brown. And lean into vulnerability. She says that about 7,000 times in that book. So it's a nice
it's wild how disarming it is. I mean, I think I could go on. Obviously you guys are covering it with the book, but it really is wild. But I say that about Timmy, my friend, who really leans on that in his interviews, because it's different than what I do. I don't necessarily, like, I admire him for doing that, but that's not my go-to. My go-to is curiosity. Timmy would tell you he's not as good at curiosity. Like he errs on the side of like talking about what he does more, and so he knows to counteract that, to like make it so people actually like him, because he knows he has a natural tendency toward talking about his projects and the kids' books he's working on. He's like, oh man, I got to counteract that by leaning on something else that I'm naturally really good at, which is vulnerability. So it's just like really it's a self-awareness game, like knowing yourself and knowing what it is that allows you to, ask your closest friends, like, what is it about me that makes you want to hang out with me over and over again? And then you can just start proactively pressing on those things that have already worked for you to build relationships with the folks that are closest to you.
Yeah, that's really great. And I just realized we've made it to the top of the hour, so we're going to be conscious of everybody's time here, but maybe one thing I wanted to touch on is this idea, and maybe we've touched on it a little bit already, but you talk about giving more than you take. Mm-hmm. And I also think, we're talking about building relationships. So I think that's an important concept.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, to me, it just makes a lot of sense. Like, that people want to know the person that is trying to figure out how to give. And you tend to ignore the phone call for when the person that is always asking you a favor, or always wants to borrow your truck because they're moving, or, like, you tend to ignore those phone calls. And so I think that translates to how we do business. Like the folks that you want to work with, the GCs that you want to refer you business, or, whatever, those folks want to be around you because you've added value to their life. Not, and don't confuse me here, because the way that you add value is the way you make a living. Yes. Like that's one way that you add value to people, by doing brilliant architectural designs. Like I see the work that my architect has done for me, and it's fascinating. But had he tried to reach out to me 3 years ago, before I had, like I wouldn't have had a need for it. Like I would have discounted him had he tried to sell me on what he does 3 years ago. And so he would have had to figure out how to add value to me in a different way, because now he's going to make a lot of money on our project. But I would like, it's because it took, it would have taken time for him to build a relationship. And until I was ready for what he needed. And so I think there's a big old market out there for everyone on this call, but not everybody is ready to buy. I think there's a statistic from ZoomInfo, or I forget where it is, but like less than 3% of your market is ready to buy at any given time. And so 97% of the folks that you get on your show, it is the case with me. It's the case with Timmy whenever he's interviewing purpose-driven entrepreneurs to get them to talk so that he can see if they want to write a kid's book. Only a small percentage are ready right now. But the game is building those relationships over time, because they will eventually be ready. And with a service like professional service like architecture, if you're going after the right folks, they're eventually going to have an opportunity to work with you. And so it'll be a test of your ability to build a genuine relationship with folks, to know whether, when it is time, you're the person they think of.
That's a really great lesson. And as we wrap this up, I think, for everybody out there, is what we're talking about is building relationships. Here's a system. That's a great point. That if you could identify the 3% right now, it'd be gold, right? But
Yeah.
that's really hard to do.
Good luck finding any strategy that's gonna, like, do Google ads. Like, people Googling, I need an architect in Chicago. Like,
Sure.
run Google ads. Like, that's about the closest I found to like finding really high intent opportunities. The rest of this stuff, it takes time.
Yeah. But then I think you've got the question too, is, are those the right people? Back to the very beginning of your framework there, you've got to have that specific strategy in place. And if you're running those Google ads, you may find 100 people, but are any of them those people that are your
People that you wanna
people, as
work
you
with.
described them?
Yep.
Yeah. That's
Yep,
great.
exactly. And I just don't want to cede control. So I want to be in control of the network that I'm building and the relationships that I'm building. I don't want to depend on I don't want to depend on outside factors. And so when I design a show, because I know, like, right now, another example of me executing this strategy in my own life. So we're about a 35 person company. We'll likely have, probably, I'd say, 50 to 60 employees by the end of this year. And we're growing really fast. And I need to be around people that have built 10 to $100 million companies. That's what I aspire to do. I want Sweetfish to be $100 million company in 10 years, but I currently am not influenced by anybody that's operating a company at that level. And so I'm right now trying to figure out, like, okay, B2B growth is great for B2B marketers, for doing biz dev for Sweetfish. It's working. We've got other people on the team that are running that now. Do I need to start a show called, 10 to 100, where I literally just go after folks that have built companies that are in the 10 to $100 million range, and fly to them, maybe do 1 or 2 episodes a month, fly to them, record with them on site, build a relationship, because I'm leaning into being curious. I know that if I do that, they're going to walk away from that experience going, yeah, this is a guy that I might want to keep hanging out with. And so from a mentorship perspective, that's great. But those people are also probably pretty great candidates to work with us, and have our team produce a show for them too. So anyway, I share that as an example of, like, I'm continuing to execute this strategy, and it evolves over time. Like, we've now got other people on our team that are doing it on the sales side of our business, but there are other things that I personally aspire to. I need mentors that have achieved the goals that I want to achieve. And so I'm going to use content-based networking to reach that end.
Are you going to do that, James?
I think so. I'm going back and forth on whether I want to wait to start it until after we get the studio built. But especially if I'm going to them, I'm like, I don't really need the studio built anyway. So
right.
I'm also I'm in a season of my leadership right now where I'm going, do I need to add one more thing? Or are the 3 or 4 things?
Yes, the answer is always yes, James. Yes.
So anyway, that's a little peek into my brain of what's going on in the
Good luck with that.
Yeah. Well, I really appreciate that, because I'm going to go back to the book just real quickly. That's one of the things I enjoy most about the book, is you talk about the things, but here's a concrete example.
Yeah.
And so what you just shared is a really great concrete example. And and it's real. It's really real. Hey, I've got to consider this and I've got to consider that. But my goal is, and the strategy to get there might be this. And I think all of us can appreciate that. I mean, we all have to deal with real life. So thank you for sharing that. And thanks for the book. Again, I recommend it all the time. I told James before we went live, I sent the book to my son. Many of you know about my son. He is an aspiring sports broadcaster, and he has this idea of interviewing sports broadcasters. Like, I've got a book for you.
Yes.
It's that
I
model.
wanted to be a sports broadcaster growing up, so that's awesome.
Yeah, he's on his way. So that's what he's studying in school. But
I was just telling my daughter, who's 17, and she doesn't know what she wants to do or how she's going to meet anybody who can help her do it. So I was saying, well, first you have to set your goal, and then think about who you need to get to know, and all that stuff. You can write some blogs or something.
Yep.
So I'm getting her to do it too.
One of the things, Katharine, that I've mentioned this to several people. We actually started a couple local shows. One called Orlando Success, another one called Boston Success. I was gonna start a whole like local media army of doing shows like this. But if it's more general like that, she's like, I don't know what I want to do. But I know that talking to successful people in the city that I live in is probably a great way to figure out what I want to do. So just have her do something that's more locally focused. It doesn't necessarily have to be on a niche, but focus on the region or the city, and then position yourself to say like, hey, if anybody has succeeded in this city, I want to talk to them on the show. And the great thing about local shows is you can do what I plan on doing with 10 to 100, like, except you don't have to get on a plane. Like, they're already in your city. So like, hey, let's meet up somewhere and we can record the conversation live. And then naturally there's going to be much deeper connection because they're going to be together in person.
Awesome idea. I'll go tell her that at dinner.
You know what I would do? I was actually thinking about this because, again, I sent this book to my son. I was thinking about not only for our community, right? Okay, how can architects benefit from this? But what advice would I give to a young person? So maybe it's your daughter who's 17, maybe it's my son that's 19. And I think if thinking in terms of maybe books and advice, I think what I would do is I would give them content-based networking, James Carbary, obviously, and the proximity principle by Ken Coleman, which kind of combines the things that you were just talking about. Proximity is, everybody's going to have to read that, but it's, what are the things that'll help you achieve your goal that are within the proximity of where you are right now. I think those are both brilliant books and great suggestions, maybe for teenagers and young people as well as everybody in our community.
Love that.
Well, James, this is another show. I know it's been a great conversation. I know it's been a great topic. I know it's been a great guest. When I feel bad about having to wrap the show up, so thank you for being so generous with your time, and thank you for the book and all the examples. Again, the real world examples, I think, are maybe the best of it all. But thanks so much for joining us today.
Awesome. Thank you both for having me. Your community is super cool. I'll definitely be telling my architect about it soon.
Yeah, we would love to. We'd love to have him as part of this community. And for anybody that's out there, if you're new to context and clarity, we have these conversations, not an interview type conversation every day, but every weekday we have these context and clarity conversations. All week we craft the topics around what we'll talk about with our guests on Thursday. So go over to Facebook, to the Entree Architect Community Facebook group. It's a community just for architects. It's a safe place for architects to talk about architect stuff, about the business of architecture. So you're invited over there, become a part of this community. And to all of you out there in our audience, I say this every week, and I mean it every week. Thank you for being part of this community. Thank you for making context and clarity a thing, because without making context and clarity a thing, we probably would not be having this conversation with James today. So thanks for making this possible. My wish for everybody out there is that you will take a little bit of time this afternoon, this evening, whatever time of day it is for you. Breathe a little bit, relax a little bit, find some way to rejuvenate, because we're going to do this all over again tomorrow. Tomorrow will be our Context and Clarity book club discussion, where we discuss Brene Brown's Dare to Lead. So join us for that tomorrow, 4 p.m. Eastern. All the same places you're finding this conversation right now. We'll be live with our book club discussion tomorrow. So everybody, thank you. I appreciate all of you. Katharine, as always, thanks for co-hosting this with me. James, thank you again for joining us. And I hope that I'll see everybody out there somewhere sometime soon. Thanks, everybody.
Bye, y'all.